Several months back, I made a whole lot of bad candles. Not on purpose, of course, and in fact, I changed nothing about what I normally do to make these candles. Same materials, same recipes, same processes. I literally changed nothing. How does one make hundreds of bad candles without changing anything? Hi everyone, my name is Wade. I'm the owner of Black Tie Barn. Here on this channel, we talk about candle making and running a small candle business, or other handcrafted business for that matter. We do tutorials, how-tos, demonstrations, and even just inspiration. So if any of that interests you, I would love to have you here for future videos. So please consider hitting the subscribe button below. And if you enjoy this video or this channel, give it a thumbs up as well. I would really appreciate it. Okay, so back to the story. Yeah, I made a bunch of bad candles. It happens to all of us. The question is, what caused these bad candles, and more importantly, being able to identify the problem, troubleshoot the issue, the cause, and then find a solution is the key to making a business continue to run successfully. But back to the problem itself. You may be wondering, what was the problem, and how did I manage to make a bunch of bad candles if I didn't change anything? Well, I didn't change anything, but that doesn't mean that nothing changed. So let me explain. The issue was that all the wicks were drowning out. Nothing was staying lit for more than a few hours or maybe a couple burns, and they would eventually just drown out and the candle would die. And the interesting thing is that all my recipes are made with specific listed ingredients or materials, specific quantities or amount of those materials, step-by-step processes. Like nothing changed. They're very, very consistent. And I'm very meticulous with my processes. And none of that had changed. But the problem was happening batch after batch after batch, but only with certain candles. Very odd, right? So if it wasn't something I was doing differently, what then? It was time to troubleshoot a little bit further. If I hadn't changed anything, that means something I was using must have changed. First thing you might think is the wicks. Let's check the wicks. But I was using the same wicks and some other products that normally use those wicks, and they were burning just fine. But just in case, I went ahead and tested a few other wicks as well, and they were struggling as well. I was having to wick up significantly just to get some kind of decent performance. So it tells me it's not the wicks. Time to troubleshoot a little bit further. Well, what about the wax? And this is when things started to get interesting. I hadn't changed the wax. Obviously, I kept using the same wax my recipe called for, but wax does have a level of acceptable variance. They have a range of acceptable variance when you buy wax from a manufacturer or from a supplier. When a wax manufacturer produces wax, there is a range of acceptable variance that could mean the melt point, the congealing point, slight differences in texture or color. As long as it falls within an acceptable range, it's considered normal and a good sellable lot of wax. And then that wax is then, of course, distributed to its suppliers, and then you purchase from those suppliers or directly from the manufacturer. Either way, there is a range that is considered acceptable, but it can adjust the wicks or the performance of the wax slightly. It shouldn't really affect it too much unless you just happen to normally use wax on one end of the spectrum of that acceptable range, and then you happen to get a wax that comes from a batch that's on the complete opposite end of that range. But even then, it shouldn't really call for significant changes in the materials, the wicks, or the process. But the problem I was having was too significant of an issue to just be normal variance, normal acceptable variance with the wax. But just in case, I did test some other waxes, other lots that had a different batch number. And wax, when it is manufactured, has a batch or a lot number. Now, every case of wax in that batch should be the same, but batch to batch or lot to lot, it can vary just a little bit. So I tested some wax from a different lot, a different batch, and I was starting to see some differences there. The other batches were working just fine. This one was a little bit off, although it wasn't necessarily causing the amount of problem I was seeing, although there was something. Now, I'm going to tell you what I did with that information here in a minute, but there was something else to troubleshoot as well first, and that was the fragrance oils. I told you I was noticing this in a few different candles specifically. And one particular candle, it was having even more issues than the others. Like the problem with it was worse than the others. And this one actually turned out to be a problem with the fragrance oil. Again, it's the same fragrance oil from the same company, but something was off about this particular fragrance oil. Nothing that you would see visually or nothing that you would necessarily smell differently. However, I noticed when using this batch of fragrance oil, it seemed to be less potent, like it wasn't as strong as it normally is, and it just was not burning correctly. Now, I'm going to get to how I solved this problem and what I used to figure out the specific problem here in a minute, but long story short, I actually had a perfect storm here. I had two problems going on at the same time. One was that the wax I was using, the lot or the batch number of that wax, was significantly different than it normally is, and that was causing some wicking issues where I really had to wick up higher than normal. And then the second problem is that I had fragrance oil that was different than it normally is as well. Now, I did reach out and ask if there had been any intentional changes in the fragrance oil, and there had not been. So my guess is this particular batch of fragrance oil just was produced or manufactured a little bit differently or incorrectly, or there were some issues with it. Whatever the reason was, I ended up getting new oil to test against, and then the problem went away with that particular candle. So like I said, a perfect storm, two different problems. That's what made this one so difficult to figure out. It's fairly common to have one thing acting a little bit differently, but when you have two different materials causing you problems at the same time, it really becomes a massive headache. So the reason I'm sharing all this is to tell you how to go about troubleshooting a problem like this when or if it happens to you. Now, I can tell you confidently that my ability to figure out this problem and then come up with a solution would not have been possible, or at least it would have been extremely difficult to troubleshoot the problem, the cause of that problem, and then identify some type of solution without using my inventory and manufacturing system that I talk about on this channel all the time, and that is called CraftyBase. So we haven't talked about on this channel how CraftyBase can help you with problems like this. So I'm going to let you know how this software literally saved me in this couple months where I was dealing with this crazy annoying issue. CraftyBase has a feature called lot tracking and traceability. And to explain it in simple terms, it's just a way to track your materials and which components or which materials were used in which products. So if I purchased a case of wax, there's a spot I can actually include the lot number or the batch number of that wax. And then when I create a recipe or create a product that includes that batch of wax, I know that that batch number, that specific batch number for that wax was included in this particular product. So with the ability to track all of that, if you notice an issue, it's very easy to go find out what other products had the specific materials and see if you're getting the same issues with those candles as well. For example, if I do have a bad batch of wax and I've determined that this is a bad batch, then I can go back to all the products that were made with that exact same batch of wax, and then I can either pull them and test to see if they're having the same issue, or if I already know they're having the same issue, I can go pull them all. Or if a customer reaches out to you and say, I'm having an issue, you can take that product and compare it to the known bad issue or the known bad product and verify, yes, this is part of that bad batch. So it's a lifesaver, but not only in helping you determine which products are bad, but also troubleshoot the problem to begin with. If I wasn't tracking the lot numbers or the batch numbers of my fragrance oil or my wax, I would have no idea which of my products were using materials from which batch or which lot. It'd be kind of like fishing in the dark. It would have been a needle in a haystack trying to figure this out. But I was able to know exactly on this shelf or these boxes of finished products, which ones had that wax and that oil. And by testing them, I could easily identify what the problem was. Otherwise, it could have taken me months and months and months of trying to figure this problem out. I ended up figuring the problem out and finding a solution within a week or two, which saved me tons of time, tons of product, and tons of money. Now, a side benefit of being able to track all this and get access to this kind of information is that it's easier to prove to a supplier or a manufacturer that they actually do have a problem. And you have the research and the documentation to help make your case, which makes it easier to get refunds or makes it easier to get your materials replaced, which I was able to do successfully with no problem, no questions asked. Now, I'm not sharing this to make you worried about using certain materials or certain manufacturers or certain suppliers. It literally can happen to any of them. So this is more of a how to go about troubleshooting the problem and why a software system like CraftyBase is just invaluable. Now, I talk a lot on this channel about how I use CraftyBase and why I love it so much. I use it for making recipes, tracking expenses, tracking my raw materials, tracking my finished goods, tracking my orders. I mean, I use it for a lot of things, but this is one feature we have not talked about, and I thought it was really, really important to share because it is so helpful. It's like insurance. You don't really think about it until you need it, and then you're glad you have it. And that's how I feel about this software. In this case, it literally saved me so much headache, so much time, so much money. The moral of the story is that stuff happens. And sometimes it's in your control, and sometimes it's out of your control. But being able to identify the problem, determine the cause, and then find a fix or find a solution is the key to keep your business running. Because a problem like this could be devastating to a small business. Larger companies, they can roll with these kind of problems. They can overcome these issues unless the issue becomes so widespread that it affects millions of products or hundreds of thousands of products. But for a small business, even just a few bad batches of candles or hundreds of candles can really be devastating to your business. So the faster you can determine the problem and the cause of that problem and then find a solution, the better off you will be. So if you haven't checked out Crafty Base, I would really encourage you to at least check it out. I have another video on the channel that overviews like its features and what it can do. I will link that at the end of this video so you can check it out if you want. And I will also have that video and my Crafty Base link in the description below as well. I've been using it for, well, I don't even know how long, several years at this point. It's hard to imagine me running my business without it. Before I let you go, I'm really curious. Let me know in the comments if you have ever had an issue like this. One that you just cannot figure out for the life of you what the problem was, why everything was working and burning perfectly before, and all of a sudden things just seem to be wrong. And if it hasn't happened to you, it likely will at some point. So if that does, hopefully this video gives you a little bit of what to think about and how to go about troubleshooting the problem. And like I said, check out Crafty Base if you haven't already. Thanks for watching as always, and I hope this video helps. I'll see y'all next time. Thanks.